Hello and welcome to EDH Rec's Upping the Average, where we take a commander's average deck list as compiled by the data on EDH Rec and make some quick swaps to it to help take it from a good start to a great one. It's time for us to get up and face the dawn, or rather, the dawn crowned. Hinata Dawn Crowned is, bonkers. 4 mana 4/4 Flampler is a great start, but the cost reduction ability is just yowza! Every spell costs more for our opponents to hit stuff, and every spell we play costs less for every single thing it targets? Just what? Hinata's EDH Rec page is filled to the brim with X spells that have multiple targets. We'll get into detail about a bunch of these in a moment, but the main takeaway for now is the fact that Hinata makes nearly all of these spells cost like 1 to 3 mana. When you can get 12 mana's worth of power for just spending 2 or 3 mana, you know you're up to something spicy. Let's get right to it, taking Hinata's average deck from EDH Rec's average deck feature and importing it to the Archidect deck building website. As always, any swaps we make to the list must either keep the total price of the deck cost neutral or else help lower the overall cost of the deck. I don't usually play a lot of Jeskai, but holy dang, this starting list is absolutely tremendous. Spoiler alert, I will actually be making the fewest number of swaps in this video compared to any other Upping the Average video so far. But remember to stick around for honorable mentions for more budget recommendations at the end of the video as well. I'll point out that this deck has a scary low land count too, which was initially one of the things that I wanted desperately to change, but as I played more of this deck, I discovered that it just didn't nearly need as much mana help as I thought. This commander is so much ramp. Hinata's ability saves us tens of mana at a time. It turns out we don't want too many lands because of just how potent that effect already is. Hinata's deck genuinely puts to my mind a mental image of a Jenga tower. Everything is interlocked and interwoven, so too many changes will dramatically alter the deck structure in a way that could be catastrophic. To try and illustrate what I mean, and before we make any official changes, we have to get to know Hinata's core cards. Buckle up, this one's a doozy. Hinata turns any X spell into a super cheap masterpiece. For example, Aurelia's Fury can hit everything and every opponent, and any extra mana we wish to spend is just cherries on top. March of Swirling Mist can, for 1 mana, phase out literally every single creature. Icy Blast taps down every creature our opponents control, again for just 1 mana, and our commander naturally meets that ferocious requirement to keep them that way for an extra turn. I really want to stress just how bonkers this effect really gets. Distorting Wake is a 3 mana bounce for every single non-land permanent our opponents control. Heliod's Intervention kills every single artifact and enchantment that our opponents play, for just 2 mana. Heck, Reality Spasm breaks my brain. This card can target every single thing if we want it to. Most of the time it will untap everything we control, completely resetting our mana, but we could also use it to tap down everything that we don't control. This is why Hinata loves some X-Blaze spells too. Comet Storm and Crackle with Power are big finishers, which do require some extra mana to become the most potent possible, but they blow up our enemies in such spectacular fashion for a very low investment. Mass Manipulation is similar. Hinata effectively deletes one of the X's in this cost, so we can just gain control of whatever we have mana for forever. And those are just the X spells. Expensive cards like Magma Opus cost a lot less when they can hit up to 6 targets. Soulfire Eruption is now 3 mana instead of 9. Or Aether Gale will cost us 2 mana, not 5. Importantly, our targets aren't just things on the field. Negate has 1 target, so it therefore costs 1 mana, not 2. Sublime Epiphany could cost as little as 2 mana when we have Hinata in play. And if you'd like to make a lot of creature tokens, Call the Coppercoats can target 3 opponents for just 4 total mana. And I think this is the best moment for me to bring up the fact that Hinata is a massive pain in the butt. 3 mana to get rid of every single thing that our opponents have in play, casting Jeska's Wills for just 2 mana, destroying all mana rocks for just 1 mana, Mystic Confluencing for 2 mana instead of 5. Make no mistake, Hinata controls the board more wildly than perhaps any commander we've discussed in this series. This is a deck that intentionally does not run Cyclonic Rift because it does not need it. It already keeps the board plenty clear enough that it doesn't need to bother spending 7 entire mana to clear the field. That's what we're dealing with Hinata here. This is why so much of Hinata's deck therefore must be built to protect itself. In addition to all the counterspells, Semester's End can save a whole team for just 1 mana. Disorder in the Court will just be 2 mana, and it also gives us a butt ton of clues along the way. Paradoxical Outcome is a major standout, able to save our stuff or just help us reset everything that we need with a full new grip of cards while we're at it. Speaking of which, this deck is extremely hungry for card advantage. Whirlwind of Thought is one of the best, although big kudos to Archmage Emeritus as well. Oh, and Open into Wonder does indeed do some wonderful stuff even when we have just a small handful of creatures. And heck, the creatures get wilder and wilder too. Battlefield Thaumaturge nearly doubles up Hinata's mana efficacy, allowing us to spend even more on big spells like those blaze effects to make absolutely certain that they're lethal. And Soulfire Grandmaster and Feather can return big spells to our hand to make sure that we continue to get them back over and over to keep our stuff safe and our biggest spells always at the ready. However, the most complicated part of this deck are its win conditions. My favorites are these: Dika, Shark Typhoon, and Metallurgic Summonings. Whenever we cast a big spell, even though Hinata reduces the amount of mana that we have to pay, we still get the big total number as the mana value. So these cards can make some truly enormous tokens. Remember, X in a mana value is considered to be a 0 when it's not on the stack, but when that spell is on the stack, we calculate the proper number for that X. This allows some cards like Zephi to go totally ham in this deck, and I'll admit that there's a fun twist to Willbreaker too. Using an X spell could make us gain control of every single creature our enemies control. That's just unreal. But most of this deck's win conditions appear to take the form of token generation, the usual spellslinger stuff that we see in a lot of decks. From Talrand to Kaikar to Young Pyromancer, this deck largely relies upon tokens to close things out, or else one of those few enormous X-Blaze spells if we can find it. It's fun to use cards like Launch the Fleet on a board full of tokens though, I gotta tell ya. Every token makes another token? That adds up fast, and that's the type of spice we need to make sure this deck delivers, and that it can properly close out a game in good time. Once we've clobbered our enemy's entire boards, we're public enemy number 1, and for good reason. This deck swiftly and easily removes everything that our opponents play, so our win conditions cannot afford to be slow in that environment. Now, normally I structure these Upping the Average videos to have multiple parts, different sections or categorizations of similar groupings of cuts and adds and different swaps that have a lot in common with each other. But for this video, I will have no such structure, because I just don't have that many cards that'll actually be swapping in and out. The starting list is dang near perfect. So instead, we'll go into a lot of detail about the few quick tweaks that we're going to make, and then we'll get to budget honorable mentions at the end. One of the first things you look to improve in a Spellslinger deck are, of course, the spells, but so many of these spells are just too dang good to mess with. Note that this deck is missing some classic staples, but like we mentioned with the Cyclonic Rift, so many of this deck's spells are already removal effects that we don't need a bunch of the big classic single target removal cards or even a bunch of board wipes. Our deck just does enough of that already, and it does them in some really fascinating ways that synergize beautifully with Hinata. So there just aren't many of these spells that I find myself wanting to cut at all. Instead, I mostly turn my attention to the creatures. Goblin Electromancer was the first card to catch my eye. I'm uninterested in him for this deck. Sorry, bud. Hinata is already such a powerful force of mana that this effect barely registers. I don't think this one ends up doing enough to warrant a slot in this deck. It can do great work in a lot of other Spellslinger decks, but I don't think it does that same thing in this one. There are two other creatures that eventually caught my eye as well, and they're tough to really cut, but let's talk about them. Dualcaster Mage and Archaeomancer. Basically, I am going to cut these, but with a really big asterisk on it, so hold tight. These are good Spellslinger cards. However, they are creatures, and every creature we play is one fewer spell slot in our deck, which means one fewer Whirlwind of Thought trigger or one fewer Metallurgic Summonings token. We have to be very intentional about the creatures we play, because if they perform the function of a spell, we should ask why we're not just playing a spell in that slot instead. And for both of these cards, there are a lot of other spells, some of which we're already playing, which could fulfill these same functions. That's why I found these cards to not necessarily pull their weight in this deck's current construction quite as much, and why I found myself willing to cut them to make room for a few other more exciting spells that we could really make great use of. However, here's the asterisk. Archaeomancer pairs beautifully in this deck with cards like Eerie Interlude. It constantly gets back that spell, so our stuff is nearly impossible to kill. Dualcaster Mage, meanwhile, is well known for being a combo enabler. When paired up with a card such as Ghostly Flicker, infinite copies yield bazillions of results. When mixed together with a card like Twin Flame, that's infinite tokens, and that's GG right there. However, Twin Flame and Ghostly Flicker don't appear in this average deck, so the Dualcaster Mage is, in this deck, just here for value, rather than a combo win. But cards and combos like these absolutely warrant us addressing for this deck, because even though they don't appear in this Hinata deck, they do appear in a lot of other Hinata decks. And that is going to change your evaluation of these cards. And as for the Archaeomancer's effect, if we like that ability a lot, then frankly what we'd want to do is add in even more of those Blink-style cards, and especially other versions of this same effect, such as Ardent Elementalist, which is even easier for us to cast. My point here is that these two cards absolutely can flourish and do flourish in a bunch of Hinata decks, but those are decks where the win condition is more dedicated to that combo theme, or contains more of those blink spells for the purposes of rescuing the entire team. Like I mentioned before, Hinata's deck is like a Jenga tower, or perhaps a Sudoku puzzle. Messing with one thing affects the relative construction of the rest of the deck. A lot of the support structure is really tightly interwoven, especially the spells and the mana support effects. Truth be told, the only part of this deck that appears to have much plasticity to it is the win condition section, which in this average deck is the token section. If we wanted to dedicate this deck more to combo or to blink, the only thing I think this deck could change would be its suite of token makers. So this is why I'm cutting the Dualcaster and the Archaeomancer, but it's also why I don't think that they are bad cards for Hinata decks. I just think that we need to choose a direction to win the game in a clear and precise way with as few distractions as possible. None of these cards, not a single card in this deck, is here just for value. They are all here to win. When you're destroying everyone's mana rocks for a single mana, you need to have your foot slammed down on the gas pedal, and you can't afford to take the scenic route for value plays. You have to win in a timely fashion before everyone comes for you. Therefore, again, we have to get rid of distractions and sharpen our focus. If you prefer winning with a Dualcaster Mage or recursion, blinky, combo-y stuff like that because it is a faster method of victory for this control deck, I don't blame you one bit. If that's the case, you probably won't bother with a bunch of these token-making cards, and it's likely that instead you'll want more redundancy, and maybe even some spell tutors to help along with that combo-style mission. What I'm doing here is simply following the average decks method and sticking to its token-tastic plan for now, which means we'll bid these options adieu, but definitely play around with these different methods of victory to find the one that feels best for you and your Hinata deck. Alright, after all that, I just have one more card to cut, and this one actually is a spell. Again, this comes with an asterisk, but Brainstorm is out of place in this deck. It cantrips, but the selection in this deck is not as great as we might hope, because this deck contains very, very few shuffle effects that would allow us to shuffle away the cards that we put back on top of our library. This is a deck where we would get Brainstorm locked most of the time. Again, there's an asterisk here. If your version of Hinata contains a high number of shuffle effects, you can make great use of this card and fully take advantage of its selective capabilities. But this current list doesn't have enough of those effects to make this card better than other proper card advantage effects would serve us instead. Alright, now that we've made those cuts, here's what I propose we add to make Hinata even punchier. First, Hinata will always need more protection, and Apostle's Blessing really impresses me. Cause it's free! Hinata reduces the generic cost so we can just pay the 2 life, and bam, Commander is protected for 0 mana. This is maddeningly tricky. Opponents will look for any and all opportunities to get rid of our Commander, and this is a terrific surprise to make sure that we're safe even when we're tapped out. Speaking of protection, here's an X spell that really got me good. Prismatic Boon. Hinata can cast this spell on every single creature we control for just 2 mana. Single target removal doesn't stand a chance anymore. And heck, we can even use this on an enemy creature to dislodge any auras they might be wearing, which is just really cruel. I like this card as a variable form of protection that also could help us finish a game, because giving protection to creatures means they can't be blocked by creatures of that color, so all our tokens can swing right through the most prominent enemy lines. That's just good versatility. I'm into it. There's one other reason I want to get another X spell in here, actually, and it's because I think this deck might actually be a terrific place for one erratic Cyclops. Okay, this card is not usually good. It takes a lot of mana to pump that power in any meaningful way. Usually. If we play this card and cast, say, a Heliod's Intervention, it could get a pump of like 10 power. If we use a Reality Spasm to tap down everything our opponents control, including their lands, we probably just clock someone for like 25 damage for just 2 mana. Listen, I just think that if we're playing those other cards that make huge tokens based on how big our spells are, I just think the Cyclops fits in with that crowd really, really well. And finally, we have a lot of cards in this deck that want us to cast a lot of spells, so I'm going to go with a bizarre final addition, View from Above. Hinata will make this card cost 1 mana, and it will give us redundant flying, but more importantly, because Hinata is a white creature, it will go right back to our hand. For 1 blue mana, we proc our Whirlwind, our Dika, our Kaikar, and heck, with Stormkiln Artist, we actually can cast this spell infinite times by using the treasure that the artist makes. It's like building your own Feather the Redeemed Jeskai edition. That's it, those are all my swaps. But before we go, let's do some honorable mentions. This deck does not need to be expensive to be explosive. If you're building on a budget, Hinata will actually make things really easy for you. For example, did you know that nearly $150 of this deck's budget is wrapped up in just 6 lands? Yeah, just use basics instead, or budget color fixers. That is no problem at all. And hey, you save another 100 if you ignore just these 3 cards too. You do not need them for Hinata to still do amazing stuff with awesome X spells. And you know what, we can keep going. If you want to save another 50, then skip the Jeska's Will, the Typhoon, and the Talisman that Wizards of the Coast somehow neglected to reprint in multiple Azorius precons for, reasons. But anyway, what would you replace these with if you went on a budget route? Well, a deck with this many X spells could have some use for Elementalist's Palette, for some occasional bigger bursts later in the game. A good chunk of those super pricey cards are card advantage effects, so if we don't have those, then I'd also want to make sure to invest in more card draw. For example, Decoy Gambit is a Punisher effect that Hinata turns into a 1-mana torture method against our opponents. I think I'm probably kind of weird, but I also just like deep analysis here. It targets, so it's 3 to cast the first time and 1 mana the second time. I don't know, it just strikes me as a pretty good rate. But the biggest thing that I'd advise fleshing out for Hinata deck on a budget are the clever protective tricks. Sajiri Shelter, Actual Shelter, and Keep Safe will all protect the target on Hinata's back, which is extremely helpful. But yeah, by changing 6 lands and 6 spells, you cut out $300 of the deck's total cost. Okay, so pardon the interruption, but as I'm filming this part, I'm already partway through most of the edit. I've done a lot of the voiceover and all of that stuff for the rest of the video. And so here I am looking over my roadmap, everything that I wrote, listening back to all of the voiceover that I've already done. And I'm just sitting here like, Joey, why are you talking about this budget swap stuff in the abstract? Why do you not have 2 deck lists? Joseph, give me 2 deck lists. Give me the regular and give me the budget swaps. Like, go further. Cut anything that costs over $10. Give me more, please. Why is this not a thing that I planned from the beginning? So yeah, surprise, I'm doing that now. There are 2 deck lists in the description. I've decided. I don't know why I didn't plan on doing that from the start, but it's there now. Please enjoy. How about the inverse? What if you're building Hinata to be even more lavish and luxuriant? Well, first, I think this deck would love a Mystic Remora to join some of the other card advantage effects. I noticed too that this deck hops a lot between spells with double red pips to double white pips to triple blue pips, and I think it's possible that a Chromatic Lantern might help out with smoothing over some of the mana issues that play pattern could provoke. Folks who pursue a slightly more blinky Hinata deck will certainly abuse a Dockside Extortionist, but also that card is good enough to play even without an extra blinking kick. If you want to super amplify Hinata's ability, then I highly recommend Spark Double Effects, or any other such card that can clone a legend, to really overcharge those X spells. The modal double-faced card Shatter Skull Smashing is worth looking into as well, because it's really good versatility for this commander. And hey, I'll even make a quick left field pick here to shout out Forbidden Orchard. It makes more targets for our X spells to hit, so that we're technically casting them for even larger sums, and we can make even bigger rewards from our spell trigger effects. It's niche, but it's pretty fun value. And finally, when pursuing the token route for Hinata, then Monastery Mentor is my very favorite card to include. What a joy this card is, and those tokens can get real big real fast, so definitely give this one a look. And hey, remember also that Hinata has been making waves in CEDH as well, so if you want your Hinata deck to get even more amped, check out the works of other CEDH luminaries to find out how to make this super controlling deck throw down in high-end metas as well. For now though, I think that just about does it. Very few swaps, but this commander is well set up. You can find a link to the deck list in the description below with the cuts in the maybe board. Quick correction, you can find both deck lists in the description now, one for the average and one for the more budget-friendly Hinata list. I hope you enjoy. And if you have any recommendations that you'd like to make for your fellow Hinata players, make sure that you leave your suggestions down in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching.